I think we'll get started now. Let me just say hello, everyone. I'm Raju Pandit Chatri from Kathmandu, Nepal. I'm with Prakriti Resources Center. I know that you are in different parts of the world, so let me just say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And I would like to welcome you all to this online seminar with the title, 100 billion goal and lessons learned for the future of international climate finance, which is a very important and very relevant topic. Well, this online seminar is being organized by CFAS, which is Climate Finance Advisory Service. CFAS is a consortium, has a consortium members from both the developed and developing countries. Well, it is primarily that a body that supports climate finance negotiators, policymakers, and advisors from developing countries, especially in relation to the negotiation with under UNFCCC, as well as Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, Standing Committee on Finance, and so on. But this has, as I said, consortium members both in the developed and developing countries. And recently, CFAS has come out with a policy brief on this 100 billion goal and also the lessons learned. So we thought that this will be very important for us to share some of the findings of this report, with this policy brief with you all. So today, the contributors, the writers of this policy brief will present you their findings, the status of the 100 billion and all the discussions that's ongoing at the moment. So we will have 3 people presenting you this, this paper today. First, it will be Martin Voss from Germanwatch. Germanwatch is an independent development and environmental organization based in Bonn, Germany. Similarly, we also have Christine Nettersen from the Greenweg. And then we'll have Michael Kohler from the Greenweg again. The Greenweg is an advisory network for climate and sustainable energy policy. It's based in Hamburg, Germany. So these, the 3 people will be presenting you the findings, as I said. Now, just to get started with this, we know that the 100 billion goal or the target has been quite a lot of, has had quite a lot of talk in the within the climate change sphere, but as well as in the developing countries when it comes to actually climate finance, targets and goal being met. Of course, this goes all the way back to almost a decade back in 2009 when Copenhagen Accord was agreed, and where the developed countries collectively agreed to provide in the short term, or what they call it fast start finance, $30 billion US. It means that was in addition to the ODA, official development assistance. It means going almost 10 billion per year for 3 years. And then this resource would all the way ratchet up to 100 billion per year by 2020. And today we're in 2020, and I think it's a very timely to discuss this issue. But having said that, of course, we're also not in a normal situation. This COVID-19 has really put us in a very difficult situation. But at the same time, the extreme events around the world are really increasing. So it means that we are in such a situation that the relevance of 100 billion or the climate finance is becoming much more relevant. In this context, also just a couple of months back, the OECD collectively came out with a report. They're saying that in 2018, they provided almost about 78.9 billion US dollars to the developing countries. Of course, you can always argue about what these numbers are, what are the channels that is being provided, what are the instruments that is all being discussed. So there are a lot of things that we can actually discuss. So on this topic, we will have our discussion going forward. Our speakers will brief you about. But before going to the speakers today, let me also give you a little bit of the housekeeping for this online seminar. Please, you have this the chat section where you can always put in your comments and the questions later, which we will address together. Similarly, you can also, if you want to speak later, you can also raise your hands, and then we will call you so that you have a direct input or questions to the panelists. At the same time, as we said, you'll notice that this is being recorded, which will later put this also in the CFAS website, the cfas.info, so that you'll have the opportunity to see this later if you somehow miss this. But at the same time, also, that the policy brief will be put up there. So you can have a look into the full version of the policy brief as well. But then again, as a follow-up, we also plan to do another seminar in December 10th, which is about post-2025 goal. So I think there will be a continuation of this seminar, just this little bit of information. And with that, let me first invite Martin to take us through to the lessons learned. Martin, you have about, like all the speakers have about 7 minutes.
All right, thank you, Raju. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks, Raju. I will pick up on your introduction and now take a moment to provide a short overview of the history of the 100 billion goal and present where we are looking forward. Starting, of course, at the Copenhagen event in 2009 and then going further via the Paris Agreement and ending up at the ambition to negotiate a new goal starting at COP26. As most of you will know, the 100 billion goal resulted from the notorious COP15 held in Copenhagen and was stated next to a commitment to provide new and additional resources as part of the Fast Start finance period until 2012, which is what Raju mentioned already. What followed was the work program on long-term finance, also called LTF, which aimed to contribute to ongoing efforts to scale up mobilization of climate finance after 2012 and to build on the progress made during the Fast Start finance phase. The program instituted 3 processes to specifically inform parties on climate finance provided and mobilized in 2014 and leading all the way up to 2020. You can see how these periods align in the time bar depicted on the slide at this moment. And these parts of the long-term finance program were the biannual submissions, the in-session workshops, and the biannual high-level ministerial dialogues. The LTF work program represents noticeably the only process in the negotiations where climate finance issues are discussed at the macro level, and that in technical and political terms. And per the current work program setup, these reflective events will terminate as of this year. And in fact, with the UN climate dialogue starting this Monday, tomorrow will be the last LTF in-session workshop to be organized and held under the convention. You can see how the negotiation processes change from being held under the COP negotiation and then turning to the parties of the Paris Agreement, changing from orange to gray in the on the slides. At COP24, parties decided to incorporate 3 similar parts as compared to the LTF process, which was part of Decision 12 at COP24, sorry. And it primarily addresses the information parties should provide in accordance with Paris Agreement Article 9.5, which requires developed countries to provide indicative ex-ante information on climate finance and on a biennial basis. Additionally, parties agree that, crucially, prior to 2025, the conference of the parties serving as the meeting of the parties of the Paris Agreement must set a new collective quantified goal from the floor of the US dollar 100 billion per year. So this is expected to happen now next year with the COP being postponed. And we are expecting to influence and go along with these deliberations looking forward. And now I will give the word to Michael, who will delve into some more informative bits regarding the current and newest numbers regarding climate finance. Thank you.
Exactly. Thanks, Martin. The Paris Agreement's Article 9.3 stipulates that climate finance can be mobilized from a wide variety of sources, instruments, and channels, noting the significant role of public funds. So a rather vague definition, and the different channels and the different sources is what we also see in the numbers the OECD has published 3 weeks ago. Between 2016 and 2018, we have an increase of the total numbers of about 20 billion. And if we just have a look at the total numbers and we imagine that these numbers steadily grow as they did the last 3 years, we can expect somehow a kind of close photo finish, despite the partial pullout of the US. You can click to the next. Exactly. So the trends suggest a close photo finish. We will see in the next years whether this has been achieved, because we have, as Raju outlined, the COVID pandemic situation right now. This definitely increases the needs of developing countries that shift currently resources towards health and have maybe not the unilateral resources available they expected before for adaptation and mitigation. At the same time, also the developed parties are struggling with the situation and have challenges to stabilize their economies. So we will see what this influence is on the year 2020. And then besides the pure total numbers, it is also very important how and of what this total volume consists of. So a closer look at the numbers matters. And this is what we want to do on the next 2 slides. First of all, regarding the thematic split, we have here the Article 9.4 of the Paris Agreement that specifies that a provision of scaled up financial resources should aim to achieve a balance between adaptation and mitigation. This is also included in other UNFCCC related institutions, like, for example, the GCF. It has a clear requirement to balance equally between adaptation and mitigation. If we have a look at the thematic split as communicated by the OECD for the year 2018, we don't see such a balance right now. And there is 21% dedicated to adaptation and 70% to mitigation, despite there were some increases in adaptation finance the recent years, but there is a long way to go to get closer to such a balance. Regarding the thematic use of funds, we have identified that at COP25, the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender, for example, and the related action plan have been agreed, but there is no COP decision yet that requires taking into account such elements in the scope of climate finance. However, multilateral funds, like for example the Adaptation Fund or also again the GCF, they have gender policies in place. And the OECD, for example, has also a gender equality marker in its set of Rio markers that would be useful or applicable to operationalize also tracking things like gender equality. But this has not really been the case in the recent reporting. And with regards to geographical splits, Article 9.4 again of the Paris Agreement emphasizes the priorities and needs of particularly vulnerable countries, such as the least developed countries and small island developing states. However, the progress of climate finance to LDCs and SIDS doubled on the one hand between 2016 and 2018. Nevertheless, the total share is only about 15% of the total volume that has been provided, which still tends to be an underrepresentation of these country groups, particularly if one takes into account the latest information that has been given, for example, by the Adaptation Gap report, but also if you keep in mind the current COVID situation. Next slide shows instruments, and then we go into the nitty-gritties of accounting. With regards to instruments, you see the ramp up over the last years of the different instrument categories, and it gets quite evident that since 2016, the total increase that we see in climate finance was almost exclusively due to an increase in loans. They were growing about 1/3 since 2016. If we have a closer look at these loans, we see that in the bilateral field, we have predominantly concessional loans. But from multilateral sources, we see that there is a very mixed picture, and it's mainly non-concessional loans that have been provided. Even though the MDB joint reporting methodology is not directly comparable to the bilateral loan definitions, the message stays quite clear. The growth of the recent years has been mainly due to loans and to a significant extent also relying on non-concessional ones. While loans undoubtedly can be useful to finance revenue generating activities, adaptation often is non-revenue generating and can therefore not equally deal with loans. This might also explain the slow growth of adaptation finance I have presented on the slide before. With regards to accounting, we have two major systems, the OECD RIO markers that are mainly applied in bilateral tracking, but also from some multilateral institutions, and the MDB joint reporting. Both of these systems have been mainly developed and designed by developed parties. But even within these systems, tracking systems, we have to a certain extent a lack of guidance how to consistently apply those, because there is different application approaches and interpretations, and this creates challenges. First of all, it somehow impedes comparability, because if one party interprets the system and the methodology in a different way than another one, you can't really compare the numbers. Then we have the situation that some of these elements might potentially lead to double counting, since we see no clear distinction of the reported contributions from multilateral climate funds, MDBs, and bilateral contributions. And the OECD, for its report, invested a lot of effort to avoid this risk through cross-checking and triangulation of data, but this is not really applicable for frequent reporting of all the different actors that are active here. Next would be the broad application of the non-concessional instruments dealt with differently by different parties and institutions. So some parties do not provide non-concessional instruments at all. Some report also the grant equivalent of their instruments. Others report only the face value, and partly including large shares of non-concessional elements. That's what I have shown on the pictures above. Then we also have some challenges with the application of the RIO marker system. You might know there is the principal and significant markers that allow to distinguish between pure climate finance activities and smaller climate shares. Some parties report only a small amount of the total finance flows as climate finance, despite having only a small climate share. Others report the full finance flow as 100% climate relevant. So there is, again, a different interpretation of the different actors, how to apply this methodology. And then finally, there is also a consistent challenge with the accounting of private finance. The OECD, a joint MDB group, and some contributor countries have elaborated individual approaches over the last years, but there is still no common approach that bilateral contributors and MDBs consistently can make use of. So all this shows there is a lot of room, but also a lot of need for improvements and harmonization of the climate finance accounting rules and definitions. This is a pressing issue that might also be improved in the context of the negotiations for the next post-2025 climate finance goal. And with this, I would like to hand over to Christine to go more into details of the process.
Thank you, Michael. So yes, the third part of the paper will address processes arrangements and platforms for discussing climate finance in future. There's no one dedicated process on the US $100 billion goal. So we had a look at a few of these processes which deal with climate finance information. First of all, under Article 9.5 of the Paris Agreement, there will be so-called biennial communications, which include ex-ante information on climate finance. And as Martin mentioned in the beginning, the long-term finance program under the convention will terminate, but a lot of similar elements are put into under 9.5, which include the in-session workshops, as well as high-level dialogues, which still open up opportunities to discuss different topics of climate finance. Then we have the Standing Committee on Finance, which is an advisory body to the convention and which deals with guidance to the financial mechanism, or also publishes reports which can also be related to the overall goal. For example, the biennial assessment report, the next one to be coming out next year, or the next year is also the publication of the first needs determination report of what developing countries would need with regards to tackling climate change. And then they contribute to methodological debates. We have some debates about different accounting methods, and the SCF, especially in the biennial assessment, summarizes methodological approaches out there currently. And then the final block would be other elements of the Paris Agreement, which deal somewhat with financial information. For example, Article 6, which is also still part of the negotiations and not concluded, also includes cooperation elements, which could also be of financial nature. Then under Article 13, we have the biennial transparency reports, which include ex post climate finance information. And then we have under Article 14, the global stocktake, which is not yet finally defined how it will take place. In Katowice, there was a decision on potential sources and themes to be addressed under the stocktake, and could also be possible to include the goal as a topic under the global stocktake. Next slide, please. On processes, we have some remaining gaps and challenges. As we have said, LTF under the convention will terminate this year. The next or the last in-session workshops taking place tomorrow. And then it, like similar elements, will be part of 9.5. And there was some debate whether this would be a problem of not continuing LTF under the convention. For example, the US announced to leave the Paris Agreement and then would not be part of any debates under the Paris Agreement anymore. But under President-elect Joe Biden, they will announce to rejoin the Paris Agreement again. Then we have the reporting I've mentioned. There are some bits which are kind of voluntary or depending on the data availability. It has to be seen how much financial data or to what detail financial data will be provided under such reporting formats. Then we have these methodological challenges and data availability. And then it could be a challenge that there's no one dedicated process to deal with the 100 billion goal, but rather it being present in different arrangements and platforms. And then we come to the opportunities. On one hand, the reporting could not bring out all the information desired, but on the other hand, it's also could deliver more data because it's broader. More parties are invited to report, also developing country parties. So it can also enhance the transparency on climate finance data out there. And then we still have the in-session workshops and biennial high-level dialogues under 9.5. And yes, and potentially under the global stocktake. And then we have I'm going to summarize the conclusions of our paper now. Next slide, please. So the conclusions on accounting and instruments mainly list that there's still no common definition of climate finance, which makes it hard to talk about the topic. There are no minimum benchmarks yet for tracking approaches and financial instruments that qualify as appropriate for climate finance. Then we have seen that the increase is in climate finance mainly due to loans. So from the perspectives of the most vulnerable countries, an increase in grants and highly concessional finance, especially taking also the COVID situation into account, would still be an important element. And then, of course, to avoid double counting and differentiate finance flows. And it's still important also to ensure the bond of trust between the parties, that there's also a common way to take progress of where we stand regarding the US dollar 100 billion goal. Then on thematic split and geographical allocation, we support the view that there should be a special recognition of low income and poor countries, and also that it should not come at the expense of ODA spending, the increase of climate finance, and the other way around. Last slide, please. On processes, it could be interesting to further debate if there should be a future role of LTF also under the convention. Then if the US dollar 100 billion goal could be also part or prominent part of the agenda of the global stocktake. And in 2016, there's been a roadmap developed on showing how climate finance for the goal could be mobilized. This could be updated based on what has been or is known today on climate finance sources and instruments, and updated for the period until the new goal would be in place. And that there will be a reflection of the latest debates in climate finance under the workshops or dialogues, which would then take recognition that climate finance is a very dynamic field, and to also take in consideration new insights while the goal is achieved over the years. So yeah, that was the end of the conclusions, and I would give back to Raju, who could gather some questions from the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Christine, for that brief presentation on the paper. I think you cover quite a wide variety related to the paper, but at the same time, you have also become, I noticed that you've become quite brief as well. But now I think as we are having only 1 hour of this online seminar, I would directly go to the participants for their brief input or views, or even if you have any questions directly to the speakers. I would like to open the floor now. And as I said, if you earlier, if you want to directly speak, please raise your hands, and I will track that your hands in the list. But at the same time, because of the time given, we have a very short time, so you could also pose your inputs or questions in the chat box, and my colleague David will be tracking the chat box as well. So now I open the floor. Well, I see a hand from Sakib. You want to take the floor?
Thank you, Raju, and thank you to all the presenters. I think it was a very, very interesting sessions. I just had a brief question on the slides about the gender aggregation on the financing. So is there any more information as to how much allocation on, let's say, adaptation fund or GCF funding is allocated for gender responsiveness? I haven't been able to find any sort of data that splits it in the way that we have in terms of mitigation and adaptation and cross-cutting. I haven't been able to find anything in terms of being able to find out how gender responsive the funding has been. So if the speakers could maybe illuminate that a bit.
Sure. I think that Michael will take note of that, and I also get that Dr. Ravi from Bangladesh wants to ask a direct question as well. Ravi, you have the floor. Do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Raju, and thanks to Martin, Michael, and Christine for very interesting and informative presentation, I think. But one thing actually you detailed out about the current situation, but I think in your recommendation, you can put that out of the 100 billion, so far the accounting, some ambiguity as well. But still, if we can say that maximum portion of that fund should go to the DCF, I think as there is a structure, then might be the vulnerable countries could get some kind of benefit from that DCF. Otherwise, bilateral mechanism, this and that, the vulnerable countries are not getting benefit from that, one thing. And another thing, actually, so far we know under UNFCCC Article 11, that UNFCCC only consider grant and concessional loan, nothing else. But it is under UNFCCC and OECD giving the accounting, but it considers non-concessional loan. So I think financing definition, quality of the financing is very important. How long will go with this kind of thing, double counting and ambiguity with the quality of the finance? I think it might be 100 billion, even 200 billion, but ultimately the real beneficiary, the vulnerable people will not get the benefit from that. It maximum will go to the mitigation, and the poor people will not get the benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those two questions. Maybe Michael, you want to go first, and then I will see if there are other questions as well.
Yes, I can kindly briefly give feedback on these two questions that have just been raised. The first was with regards to gender. Yes, the GCF and the Adaptation Fund, they have gender policies in place. For example, the GCF demands gender action plans and gender-related safeguards for each of its projects. So I think it's hard to distinguish here to say a certain amount goes into adaptation or mitigation. It's rather that all projects have to follow certain gender-related aspects. This is something I think other institutions and also bilateral contributors might learn from. With regards to the OECD gender equality marker, we have found here one source that gives an estimation that about 1/3 of the climate finance projects take gender equality into account with a gender marker of 1, so a significant amount. Yeah, and this gives an indication potentially how many projects do that take into account, but there is no definition and no mandatory tracking of that yet. But of course, one could discuss whether this should be improved for the future, that we get a better overview, more transparency about gender aspects in climate finance. This is maybe also something we can recommend for the negotiations of the post-2025 goal, that, for example, gender is better taken into account. With regards to the second comment, I think it was mainly around the quality of the finance that is provided and the instruments that are applied. And I think there was the question why not only concessional loans and grants are eligible under the UNFCCC. The direct answer is because there is no rule that defines that. That's a problem. In the context of the 100 billion, there were very different expectations how this 100 billion consists of, which instruments, which areas, which thematic areas, etc. But there was no negotiation on these things and no clear text that provides certain rules on that. And this is, of course, a problem here. And again, one could better take that into account for a follow-up post-2025 goal, and also discuss how actually the total volume that will be agreed upon actually is composed of.
Okay, thank you. Christine, do you have anything briefly to input into the recommendation that Dr. Rabi suggested?
So you mean the second comment, or on the...
Dr. Rabi suggested something to have it in the recommendation as, I think it was mostly to do with with loan and grant component being concessional only being dealt under the GCF, but the overall OECD taking the entire amount of loan as well. If not, then you can also come back later for sure. So let me just go to the other questions that we have in the chat sections. Thank you very much. Well, just to very briefly to ask, Noami asks about, she talks about the inconsistency with the tracking around the Rio between the climate finance and the non-climate finance marking. So what would be the couple of examples in order to take that forward? Similarly, Marika is asking that, well, I mean, you talk about Article 6 and Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, but what about 2.1c? And 2.1c is basically the financial flow being consistent with the low carbon development. So I think that's the question with how you see that, especially in leveraging and promoting private finance. Similarly, Oslim from Can Europe also asked about the scope of the long-term finance goal to be determined, before 2025 next year. But I mean, what is about its, contributing according to their capabilities? Is that right? Is it possible to go forward that? But then again, there's a final question also from Timmons Roberts from the US, who says that maybe there's a system to harmonize that MDBs and OECD marker are they're going in a harmonized manner. So if there's anything, what he says is harmonization towards which, like if you say if you want to harmonize between MDBs and OECD, then what is that going forward? And are there a very different system, or is it the same that you want one can combine with each other? What are the differences? What would be this added value in taking that forward? So those are the 4 specific questions for now, and if you want to address them very briefly.
I could address the one on 2.1c. Yes, correct. This is also going to the direction of the 100 billion goal. I would see it rather as a sub-point of the global stocktake. The global stocktake will be there to take stock of the overall objectives of the Paris Agreement, and 2.1c belonging to this group of objectives. Considering the debate around 2.1c, I would also say that it's currently also in the debate how to measure it, or how to what's behind to this article. And next year, when the new biennial assessment will come out, there's for the first time one chapter just dedicated to this article and potential ways of measuring it. So this would also put more light into the debate how this could relate to the goal as well. So I would also underline that this article is important, but to see it within the context of the global stocktake.
Michael?
Yeah, I can respond to the ones that deal with the nitty-gritties of accounting and the instruments. With regards to the Rio marker system and the different interpretations of different contributor parties, this refers to the situation that the parties deal different with their accounting of the principal and significant elements that are tracked under the Rio markers. Some countries say if there is only a marginal part of climate finance related elements in a finance flow, they account for 100% towards climate finance, whereas other countries only account half of it, or 40%. So there is a different approach from different providers. And this, of course, could somehow be harmonized in future if one can agree on something like this. Then the next question was regarding the post-2025 goal and whether the provision of the parties will contribute according to their capacities. Well, this goal is not negotiated yet. Therefore, we have no clear definition how it is composed of, and also which countries will provide what. but most likely one cannot expect, because that was also not under the 100 billion goal so far, that you will have clear rules which country will provide what. This is highly unlikely, that you have so-called equity indicators or something. There is scientific debate around that, that you kind of come up with certain approaches to define what would be a fair share for each country, taking into account, for example, historical responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions, or the financial capability right now, the population, and also on the recipient side, vulnerability, etc. But it's highly unlikely that countries will agree to that. It's rather that, again, a total volume will be defined and the rules how to account that, and then the countries will from voluntarily decide what they are able to provide within their capabilities. Then from Timmons Roberts, the question regarding harmonization. Well, between MDBs and the OECD Rio marker system, of course, this is a very complicated field, because the parties that use the OECD Rio markers, they are under the UNFCCC. However, the MDBs are not, and therefore it's of course somehow very difficult to agree on rules under the UNFCCC that are then imposed on MDBs outside the UNFCCC. Nevertheless, this is a process that is ongoing, and there is potential that the parties that are under the UNFCCC can also use their influence within maybe the MDBs to go forward in this direction of harmonizing certain elements.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Martin, do you want to come in with any comments? Do you have any things to add?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, we got a couple of more questions in the chat section, and let me also just go with them as well. Luna from Denmark, I guess, asked, like, this is something I also wanted to ask you actually. Probably when you talked about the numbers, they were basically related to adaptation and mitigation. How do you see the loss and damage going forward? That's what she's asking in the present context. So probably we don't know. Maybe in the future biennial assessment and the OECD report, they might report it, because this is until now we only have report from until 2018. But we'll see that. But from your perspective, when you did the analysis of the numbers for last few years, how do you see this this going forward? At least in the not just on the current part, but also going beyond 2025. That's what he asked. And there was a follow-up question from Özlem that from Can Europe, what he's basically asking about the annexes. Like, do you think that that is still relevant, the Annex 1 and non-Annex who is receiving the resources? Because he's particularly interested that in the context of Turkey, I think he's trying to get to non-Annex where he can also receive funding for climate finance. So do you have any quick response to that? Maybe I'll start with Michael and then.
Yeah, maybe a brief one from my side. Those questions now, they rather are forward-looking, and I like this because the future is in front of us. And we also, as Raju outlined before, are just in the process of preparing another policy brief and another online seminar on the post-2025 goal. And these elements will be reflected there. So discussing right now, we don't have under the Paris Agreement the Annex, well, at least not Annex A, Annex B countries anymore. It's rather the wording of developed and developing countries. So this is an element that we discuss in the other policy brief and also in the next online seminar. And I have the same feeling for the very sensitive topic of loss and damage. This will also be reflected in the next webinar. So I'm doing already some merchandising for our next online seminar and would postpone this question to this.
Yeah. Christine, do you want to come in or even Martin?
No, I agree to what Michel said also about the status of Annex 1, Annex 2 countries, that on purpose it was a bit, on the Paris Agreement, the language wasn't so strongly focused on these categories anymore, still underlining that developed countries should take lead on climate finance provisions, but rather opening up these groups also, because developed countries could also act as donors, like in South cooperation, for example.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, there's one more question from Timmons. Then that question actually is directly to me. So if I just check out my facilitator hat and answer that, I would say that, well, for us in the present context, climate finance is becoming extremely important in the context that the extreme events are growing all over the world. And we know the kind of numbers that's been the way it's being delivered, the way it's been calculated. And we also heard from the accounting, there's so much of loan being offered, whether in terms of concessional loan or in the full terms loan. So I think there's also a lot of overlap between the ODA money and the climate finance that's coming in. But if you see the gravity of the problem that the developing countries, especially the very vulnerable countries like the states and LDCs are facing with the extreme events growing every year, it means the volume is just not sufficient. I think there is more effort that the developed countries need to really put in if they want to very genuinely help developing countries address the impacts of climate change. And this is something, I mean, with the COVID, it's becoming more difficult because whatever money that they used to put into their, extreme events, or let's say the addressing climate change impacts, now if the COVID is taking that away, it means the growing, the resources are being diverted to other things like COVID, and this really going down. On top of that, when countries are being offered with loans and all this, that makes them puts the developing countries into extremely difficult position. So I think when it goes to the 2025 goal, these things need to be taken into account. The vulnerability system, the way countries are being faced, the accessibility issue, the way the channels that'll be easier for them to access so that immediately they can respond to the extreme event. So I think this is a huge debate that how we really access and deliver and actually reach the vulnerable communities. So of course, I hope that with these learnings that now we're in 2020, with these numbers coming, probably in the future that all these things will be corrected, and then we move into that direction going forward. Whether it's a GCF related, whether it's a bilateral, whether it's multilaterals, I think it's not about just playing and accounting numbers here and there, but actually the finance that is being provided, each actually addressing the problem on the ground or not. I think are the people really feel that they're being helped or not? I think that is the very fundamental question, and we need to start looking into that part in the future days. Thank you. And I also see that Charlene is asking a question. I think is it just a comment? I'm just trying to read through. Is it just a question or a comment? No, I think it's a question to Mikhail that it says the LDCs and SIDS noting that around 50% of total flows is not enough. Well, I agree, given the vulnerability, if needs estimates are not yet complete, how do you establish how much is enough? What will be the fair, that we need to have a better matrix for vulnerability and how that can be better judged for the allocations that you provide to SIDS and LDCs. Mikhail, I think you did that quite a bit of number crunching, so probably you have some opinion on that.
Yes, exactly, and it's a good question, and I would guess it wouldn't make sense again to come up with certain equity criteria that determine how much would be reasonable for each contributor and also recipient country. It's rather a bottom-up process, and here we also need more transparency on the side of the recipients. And therefore, I think this question and also how it's kind of embedded in the UNFCCC system is very much linked to the needs determination process, where the countries themselves also come up with estimations what they actually require for mitigation support, but for these countries, particularly adaptation support. They communicate that now in the next round of NDCs they prepare, and other documents that are just under elaboration. And hopefully within progress in this work stream of needs determination, we get a better aggregated results for the different countries, what they actually require.
Yeah, and the issue of vulnerability, I guess, is not an easy topic to really deal with that. I mean, with the growing impacts, I think this is also becoming very wide. And also, if you look at the capabilities, not all countries have the same capability to address the impacts. So I think it is a very difficult territory to get into. But I think at some point of time, some compromises will have to be done. That the group of countries that has been either identified under the convention or the Paris Agreement, which has very clearly realized that. And then maybe if there are extra, context that needs to be brought in with that, but also realizing what has already been agreed would be the way ahead, I guess. But with that, now almost we are towards the end. We'll still have like about 5 more minutes. So I would still encourage anybody to have a couple of questions, and then I will go into a closing wrap-up session. The timing. Anybody wants to go? You can directly, not necessarily write, but you can directly ask raising your hand as well. If there's really not, then what I would ask, or maybe like give a couple of minutes to Mikhail, Christine, and Martin to wrap this up. But at the same time, I would still like to see that if you could, highlight some of your very 1 or 2 very key points that you see was very important for you, what you personally felt while you analyzing this paper and looking into, when you did the number crunching, trying to do the analysis, trying to review what others have done it. What 1 or 2 things that you felt from your side needs to be really addressed and going forward from your not just from the numbers and things like that, from your heart as a person working in climate finance and trying to really address climate change, and then supporting developing countries address impacts of climate change. So just a couple of sentences from 3 of you. Mikhail, you want to start?
Yes, I can do that. Well, I think by analyzing the numbers, that was mainly my responsibility here. It's not just about the total volume. That's my personal feeling in this context. The devil is really in the details. So how are the numbers composed of? What are the elements that are included here? And I have the feeling there's lots of room for improvement and also need for improvement for the next target, to also talk about how the numbers are composed and not only how high they are. That's my personal impression. And I like very much the forward-looking responses and questions from the audience. And again, would like to highlight that we have another webinar on the 10th of December dealing with the post-2025 goal.
Christine?
Yes, my lessons learned from the platforms and arrangements would be that I'm curious if there will be a new, or there will be a meta platform to discuss the goal, for example, as part of the global stocktake, that it will take also some prominent role there. That for the reporting formats for countries, how they are adapting to these reporting formats, and what data will be delivered with regard to finance, also received and provided, as well as the predictability of climate finance. And lastly, on how methodological reports and discussion in the biennial assessment or the needs determination report will also contribute to the debate on how the target should be compiled, or what it should look like, what instruments are required, what themes should be addressed, etc. So these 3 points.
Martin?
Yeah, I have to say that I'm really eager to see things kick off in terms of discussion of a new goal, and I'm very much with Michael and looking forward to how this can be fleshed out, and not only in quantitative terms, but also qualitatively, given the background of how the 100 billion goal came to be, which was basically a political number and not really based on any technical assessment or thereof. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it, and stay tuned for our webinar on the 10th.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin, Christine, and Mikhail. Well, I think that's you all got the snapshot of what the policy brief really is. And then, as we said, that this brief will be put up in the website of CFAS, cfas.info, so that you can have a look. Also, the recording will be put up there. But if you just go to the website and also join the email list, you will get the updates and upcoming webinars and things like that. So it is important that if you want to stay in touch and get updated, that would be very helpful. As I said, there'll be on 10th December another seminar on post 2025 goals. So hopefully looking forward to meeting you there again. And thank you very much for making your time today, and also for your questions and comments and suggestions. Definitely, I see that in the last comment, Timmons puts also refers to the Oxfam report, which is a very striking report that has recently come out. But at the same time, the interesting part is this year when OECD came out with the ODA report with almost $152 million given in 2019, and then the climate finance report. So they all look very, interesting reports. But what with this number is actually what is flowing on the ground would be something that the Oxfam has looked at very closely. I think this is very something that we can continue to look into. And if you're interested, he has just sent the link, and please have a look. But at the same time, I would like to see that this debate, the learning is really made so that it, as I said earlier, that makes impacts to the vulnerable developing countries. It's just not about putting numbers together, but actually how the problem is being addressed. Because even now, under the Green Climate Fund or other funds, developing countries, especially the vulnerable and the poor and with the low capacity countries, are having extremely difficult in accessing resources. So how do we make these resources reach to the local level? How do these resources available can the developing countries access and make available for their people? I think that is a very fundamental question. And the lessons definitely have to be learned. It's been almost a decade we talk about $100 billion goal, and we have come to 2020. Probably when the numbers for next, 2019 and 2020 is put together, all these lessons are being learned and we can adjust them in our going forward. With that, I would again like to thank you all very, very much. And thank you also to the organizer CFAS for this and all these speakers. Again, thank you very much and see you soon.